put the owners and the players in the Russian Thunderdome for our entertainment during the lockout. That's the MLB players and owners as we have a lockout, which started, 11:59 Eastern time last night. So you have the first work stoppage in Major League Baseball in 26 years, going back to the famous or infamous 1994-1995 work stoppage that knocked out the 1994 World Series. So many crazy stories going back to that when you had good teams. Like what would have happened with the Montreal Expos team that year that was doing so well, and then you don't have a World Series that year. You come back. You have the truncated season, which happened to be the only year the Atlanta Braves won the World Series in '95 there during their crazy successful run. But this time around, it's been 26 years. But I'm reading from a CNBC article here of what both sides want. So starting with the players, the players believe the current CBA doesn't favor them. So obviously they're wanting changes. And the Players Association, they want to address service time rules that restrict most young players to teams for the first 6 years of their career. And I think it's also fair to say many of these teams manipulate the 7th year of service time. So you actually have 7 years of big league control when you manipulate that year. We've seen that with a lot of players where you hold that guy back. Chris Bryant is the best example. You hold that guy back for a few weeks, whatever it is in the season, even though he's totally major league ready, you bring him up, and that gets you the 7th year of service time. And Chris Bryant, they filed a grievance and didn't win. It's the rules. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's in the spirit of the rule, but the players want to change that, and I totally get that. The Players Union also, they want a luxury tax overhaul to lure teams to spend more on player salaries without fear of harsh tax penalties. And the union wants to change MLB's free agency structure to get younger stars paid sooner. So you've heard potentially 5 years of control, 5 years of free agency instead of the 6 or the 7th year with service time manipulation. As I said, they also want to see a bump in minimum salaries, which stand at $570,500 right
now.
For
every damn day. Go
lots of information there. And I'll get your guys' thoughts first. We can do the who's to blame. Cam, I think you always have a great perspective on this because you were a player, but just being on the radio with you and being friends with you, especially the last 3 years or so, I think you also you look at it from both sides. You take the ownership's side, where even if you side with the owners of the players, I think it's always smart to look at bargaining, put yourself on the other side of the table, and look at what they're wanting as well. So what do you think about this, Cam?
Well, it is very confusing, and I don't know a ton about it, and I'm not going to act like I do, but. The MLB owners are still different than NHL owners when it comes to the MLB. You play every damn day. Your TV contracts are just gigantic. You got money coming in. And we talked about the Pirates too. So if you spend a little bit of money on marketing, you're going to attract people. You just will. You have for the most part you are. You got to clean up a couple of different things. So I do look at it differently. When it comes to the salary cap in the NHL and stuff like that, I don't know what the hell I think, Charlie. I really don't. But I will say this: the one things that do stick out with the argument for the players, and I do think I'm more on the players' side than I would be in different situations with the NHL and whatnot, and different with whatever. But you look at the minor league system in the MLB. I mean, these guys, dude, they're getting treated like. These guys are making $45 million up top, and then down one step down, you're making the peanuts. You can't even take a date out where you're counting your pennies. You can't do any. You barely become healthy. Hell, if you take vitamins, it's going to cost you out the ass. Just try to be an athlete, a professional athlete. By the way, you still somewhat are. Things like that. The minimum salary for some of these players. You always bring up Matt Carpenter all the time, Charlie, where he was making nothing. He's dominating, just dominating, making pennies. He was making as much as I was making, and I was scoring once every 150 games. I don't know. There's a lot to bitch. There's a lot to bitch about. But then you look up at the big boys and they're making a ton of money. You look at the Mets. You look at some of I believe the Rangers the other day spent $500 million in a matter of 24 hours. So some of the dudes are making money, but it is, I don't know. There's a lot to it, Charlie. It's hard to explain.
Seth, what do we think?
It's funny how when like a guy is in his contract year, how they're guys are like, hey, keep an eye on this guy, like Trevor Story or Correa. They're like, hey, keep an eye on this guy. You know, it's their contract year, so you know they're going to play really well. And then there's other moments where guys get paid a boatload, like you said, Cam, how Carpenter is making pennies and he's playing at his peak, and then he gets all this money. And I know age
terrible.
didn't help and all that stuff, but yeah, I think there's something to be said that like these guys make a boatload and they get all this money, they get their payday finally, and then it's you question how much the love of their game is, you know, or how much love they have for the game because you know.
Well, they could. What if Carpenter would have got hurt though? He does all this, breaks all these records, and all of a sudden he's hurt and he can't come back, and he's just not like. Is he signing? He didn't make any money, and he was unbelievable through his prime years. Where now you've seen some of these kids in hockey, they're just signing right off the bat, like boom, like Brady, all those guys, man. 64 Schmel, there you go. Well, we're going to get you in the best years, and we're paying you for it.
Who was that? Jeff Skinner from the Sabres. Remember when he had like a 60-point season and then went over there, and then got
getting
paid.
Overpaid.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a common thing. Just guys working their butts off to make a big pay to get a big contract, and then a lot of times, you know, it comes down to if they have, you know, the right mindset, and they have, you know, the love for the game to continue playing even though they've made the money,
or they're hurt.
And here's where,
since they're older.
Well, yeah, I think, and if you want to compare baseball to hockey, they do have a similar amount of players. Now, baseball revenue is much more, but I do think the difference is that hockey has a much stronger middle class of player, and that's what a lot of these players are fighting for. It's very easy. Now look, Max Scherzer's getting paid. He's $43.33 million AAV, but in theory, a rising tide should raise all boats. I mean, he's out there negotiating on the players' side for everybody, for the little guys. And that's where, to me, you know, again, I'm reading from the CNBC article that for 3 straight years now, the average salary of Major League Baseball players has dropped. So you had a record high, $4.1 million was your average player salary in 2017. It's now 3.7. So
really?
even though the big dogs, like, it's very easy to look at, okay, Corey Seager got 10 years, 325, and Max Scherzer got 3 years, 130. Carlos Correa is probably going to get 10 years, 350, whatever it is. But you don't really have a middle class in baseball anymore. You have the top end guys, and then they have the young players that don't get paid really anything for at least 3 years, and then you have arbitration. And for some of those guys, you can do the math pretty easily on this. If you go to college, if you go to a Division I college, where then you have to stay for 3 years, by that point you're about 21. Let's say you get drafted. Let's say it takes you even 2 to 3 years, which is pretty normal, even if you're a high pick, to get to Major League Baseball. So let's say you're a rookie around the age of 23, 24. Let's say they manipulate your service time. When do you hit free agency? The math is pretty easy. You're hitting free agency at 30, 31, and now teams don't really want to pay guys like that. I think now Steven Matz is about 30. Okay, so he got a 4-year deal. I think what happened in baseball, in my opinion, is for years the system was more fair, even though it didn't make sense. And I say that because players got nothing early, but then players got way overpaid in their 30s when they weren't good. Now, that didn't make a lot of sense. But for a while there, you had the steroids era where you actually had guys who were really productive when they're 35 to 40 years old. You're not seeing that as much. So I don't mind that it should be more fair, but then don't just make it fair on the back end where you're not paying those guys when they're not as good at 32. If I'm an owner, and this is what the players are bargaining for, make it more fair on the front end, where if you're really good early, allow those players to make more quicker. That's where, you know, we've gotten into this argument also about a player like Kyler Murray. You're I think losing a lot of athletes. If you're an athlete, believe me, there's a lot of dudes who have the chance to play football and baseball, right? There's a lot of quarterbacks that can throw a 96-mile-an-hour fastball.
Yep.
And when you look at quarterback money in the NFL and you look at Kyler Murray, now Kyler Murray was an easy choice because he won the Heisman and he was going to be a quarterback. Quarterbacks get paid.
They're getting
But
paid.
also, when you're looking at, hey, I'm drafted by the Oakland A's, they're cheap as hell. They're not going to sign me. There's sewage going on in their football stadium. That's an easy call for him to go to football. I think also as an industry, you're losing a lot of young athletes because people don't want to wait till they're 30 years old to really get paid.
I know. I don't blame them. Like again, it's weird. Like you just wait and you're waiting, try to stay healthy. You try to stay healthy, and you can make $700K, and you're living the MLB lifestyle. You're not. I mean, you're living in New York City, or you're living in the West Coast. You're making $750,000. Like you trust me, it ain't that much over there. And you're trying to keep up with everybody. Everything costs. You just, I don't know, man. They got some problems to deal with. Let me chime in real quick. Jobu chimes in and goes, guys, billionaires fighting against millionaires over to how to split up billions of dollars. MLB's viewership is slipping. This is absolutely not going to help.
Yeah, baseball is not a sport that can afford a lot of this. They already had some really bad looks around COVID where they did all of their negotiating in public through the media. I hope they don't do that again, although, look, when every single player has a Twitter account and all that, I don't expect this to be something that is behind closed doors. That's where I think the NHL did a much better job of keeping their negotiations hush-hush, whereas every single thing was leaked out with Major League Baseball. I think we're going to see that again. I think we're going to have a really, really long lockout. And I don't know if there's going to be games missed. That wouldn't surprise me one bit. But look, we talk a lot about leverage. We talked a lot about leverage with the NFL lawsuit with St. Louis, which is, look, I've said my piece. I understand why they settled. There's not one person that can tell me that you didn't have more leverage right before a trial in January when the NFL postseason was started and the Super Bowl was going to SoFi Stadium in February. So on the same token, the players, they know their greatest leverage. And then on the other side, the owners, are they thinking, hey, we can wait these guys out longer when they're not getting checks? The true leverage comes when we get close to spring training. The true leverage comes when we get close to really missing Major League Baseball games and players miss checks and owners miss revenue from tickets and games and all that.
And where are you going to go when you don't play? Like, you can't go, like, you're just locked out. Like, what do they do? Like, when we locked out, some guys had set up opportunity to go play other places and get paid. Like, they'd have teams, like that, Danbury Thrashers and stuff like that. During the 04 lockout, like, they're paying you cash under the table. Like, you can make money in hockey if there's a lockout. I mean, you're still getting screwed over beyond belief. But what are the MLB guys going to do? Can they go to their home country and play for something or something?
Well, in theory, you could have guys who want to play in Japan. I mean, we're talking about players that aren't under contract, right? A bunch of these guys just signed contracts, right? They just signed contracts in the last 3-4 days. Now, in theory, if you're a free agent or if you weren't tendered a contract, could you go play in Japan? Could you go play in Korea? I'm sure that's an option for some fringe guys. We've already seen that anyway. We've seen some fringe Major League guys go over. Miles Michaelis did not work out at first in the major leagues. He goes over, overseas, and he comes back and is a really good pitcher. Right. He gets a great contract with the Cardinals. I think you'll see that a little bit. And Cam, my question to you is, so tell folks, so you go through 2 lockouts. Now, if the 04-05 lockout doesn't happen, would you have made your NHL debut that year?
I'm pretty humble on where I'm at. I think that Lou would have called me up that year. Now, they might have been in a jam because they had they would have signed Oliwa and Langdon, so they would have had to get rid of them, but they did it the next year anyway. I think I would have got called up. I was crushing guys in that lockout year, and I don't know. Lou would have called me up, I think. That would have been awesome. So, but I think that during that lockout year, it was like perfect for me because I had Robbie Ftorek as my coach. I had so many awesome guys on that team that took me under the wing. Pascal Rion, Robbie Skurlak, all these cool. We still had other big heavyweight tough guys. So, they would teach me and but I'd still fight everybody. It was actually perfect. And Robbie was so cool to me. And you learn a bunch of stuff, and they played me up and down the lineup here and there. But then 2012 lockout came around, and that, when you're a little bit older and there's a lockout, I remember, dude, I told you this, where I'm in St. Louis, and it's like me and like Patty and got a bunch of Brennan Bolig, it's all the dudes, in St. Louis. They're still grinding it and doing their thing. We're skating with Jamie Rivers at Chesterfield in the middle of the winter, and it's so effing cold outside, and they were so cheap at the time because they were just like going under, and they'd keep the Zamboni doors open just to get the cold, and we're like bagging ourselves at like 7 a.m, like in freezing cold, like when are we starting? And then I had to go box, so you're just working out 3 times a day, working out for what? You don't know the end game. So when the biggest mindset, like the biggest buzzkill is when you work out hard, but you don't know what you're working for or what your goal is. And I know it seems simplistic, but I'm telling you, you always have to have an end goal. Like, I need to get here, I need to get there. Here's the date, just like a UFC fighter or whatever. So every normal year, you're like, September 6th, baby, that's when I'm leaving. So I'm going to do my heavy weights. I got this coming there. Then once August hits, it's cardio, cut my muscle mass out a little bit so I'm not coming in too late. And you just have a game plan. It just helps you, your mindset work. But that, Charlie, is so miserable. I'm like, oh, God. I call the guys in the morning like, it's freezing. Jamie's like, get on here, let's go. Bagging us, freezing cold, for what? And then all of a sudden it starts with no training camp, and I got sent down like a week later.
Okay.
Then I got called back up and play with Yager, but it's all good. Go ahead.
Love it. So you're talking about the 04-05 lockout and also 12-13. So tell us from your standpoint, because you're at 2 different points in your career. You basically just started when the first lockout hit, and you might have been called up, but then you debuted the next year. And then the second lockout, you're towards the end of your career, and you've been a veteran in the NHL now for close to a decade. So tell us your mindset. How is it different for each? And then also, how does the Players Association prepare? For example, with Major League Baseball, we heard that they held back their media rights money for the players for the last 4 years to give those players something if they need checks here coming up, if it's a long lockout. So I'm sure all these Players Associations, what do they tell you as a player of how to prepare for a potential work stoppage?
Wow. They when you're young in 04, you're not even – I didn't even know what was going on. You're just like, what do I got to do tonight? You're a kid. I was 20 years old, 19, 20 years old. You're just a kid. And I just got out of juniors, and the lockout's going on. I didn't understand it. I just knew what I had to do, and the guys were just awesome. But I remember, like, in the locker room in 04, where, like, they'd give you that 401k thing, and I'm like, what? What is this? And I already signed, so I already had a couple hundred, I signed for a couple $100,000, spent a lot of it, cooked my parent. We just needed money. So that kind of went quick. So I didn't, but we were comfortable at the time. And I remember getting that little 40 with a green. I remember it was a green the green packet in the locker room. And I remember going to one of the guys, the older guys. I'm like, what am I doing here? And they helped me fill it out and stuff like that. So I just threw it in there. And then all of a sudden, years later, you're like, oh yeah, you're like, oh, I'm glad I kind of did that. So like little things like that. And I know that's not, you always do that one way or the other. But I remember there being a lot of things. Now, 12-13 lockout, dude, it was. I don't know. Like they'd have something. I remember probably getting a couple checks from something, but I think it was kind of unorganized, to be honest with you. It was everybody was like, what are we doing? Where are we going? Guys are playing in Europe, doing this. Some guys are just locked out. I was locked out because I played too many NHL games. But if you didn't play, you could play in the minors. I don't know. It sounded like a big cluster F to me.
Yeah, and I think if you spin it now to baseball. And I'm just trying to think again about how you can compromise, because at the end of the day, that's what it has to be. It has to be a compromise. Although, and I am more pro player usually, and especially in this position, I do think the players, they have to have a win. I think the players have to get a win in terms of them making more money and making more money earlier. But you can also throw things back to the owners that helps both you and the game. For example, the one thing that you could throw it into the owner's corner that benefits them is they make the majority of their money from the postseason. And if you're a baseball purist, I get it. Okay, if you didn't even like the first wild card, if you didn't like the second wild card, guess what? All that is here to stay, man. Baseball, it's going to look more like the postseasons of the other sports. And if you do allow the postseason expansion from 10 to 14 teams, that's a way you can give the owners a little something that they want, right? They want more money from the postseason. And, oh, by the way, that helps the players.
That's fine.
Also, because you're more marketable. When you have 4 more teams, you have about 100 more players who are now in the spotlight of the postseason. That's where you can make your money off the field, right? So there's somewhere you can compromise right there. And, look, they're going to fight it out for the other stuff, for service time, And for all that, another way you could, I think, an easy compromise. There's easy compromises and there's the difficult compromises that are going to take a long time. The postseason expansion to me is easy. And then also the DH. Look, that's a way where you can say to the players, okay, if we have universal DH, that's about 15 or more players where if you're at the end of your career, you're a proven player, you can still hit, your legs aren't what they used to be. That gives a few more guys a job that make a bigger salary if you want to go that direction as a team, or other teams will use it as a way to give everybody rest throughout the week. And that might, you know what? If you're off your feet for 5 to 7, 8, 10 more games a year, if they rotate that DH throughout all the position players, hell, who knows? Maybe that keeps you healthier. Maybe that gives you an opportunity to put up better numbers. Maybe that allows you to play another year or two and make more money.
Yeah, or may have a big moment because your body's okay, right?
Yes.
Just have a big moment. And you know what? If you play these wild card games, everybody's watching them. Look, you might not watch that game in August or in July. It's like we're done every day, something. You're playing the same teams over and over. But you get into a playoff situation, whether you want to call it playoffs or not, wild card, I don't give a damn. You're watching the game. And there's every pitch counts. It's a different mindset. And so what, guys? You want to compromise? Well, you might have to play a couple more. Now you go prove yourself. Now you're a young kid. Now you got a chance to like hit a bomb in a big moment. I don't know. I don't mind that. I wouldn't mind that at all as a player.
And just wrapping up this conversation, I just think some things coming from the owner's side, and I also don't think Rob Manfred is the greatest spokesperson as the commissioner. I understand being a commissioner is a thankless job. How many commissioners really have a ton of respect? It seems like Adam Silver in the NBA, the players seem to love him. Where, look, Roger Goodell, the players hate him. I mean, Gary Bettman is booed everywhere he goes. Now, I don't know how popular he is with the players, but Rob Manfred gets crushed all the time.
Well, he said some stupid things, too.
Right. And
the trophy thing. I don't know.
Right. The trophy was what? Just a piece of metal or a scrap of metal and all that? And so Rob Manfred in his press conference yesterday, he was talking about how some of these small market teams can't compete. And I understand it's a different ball game between the Pittsburgh Pirates and the New York Yankees. They will never generate as much money. But you can't tell me that these teams are really trying to win. They're not. I think there needs to be, as in hockey, to me, baseball, you can talk about the luxury tax and how raising that would help, but I think they need a salary cap floor. I mean, hell, that would help even more. It would help teams. When I say help teams, you would have fan bases, for example. Well, if you had to spend a certain amount of money, I mean, we have teams spending $40 million a year. We have teams spending less than what Max Scherzer is making. So let's say you had a salary cap floor, whatever that number is. I don't know. Let's say it's $60 million. Okay, well, guess what? Now you have to sign somebody who's kind of good in free agency. Maybe you have a superstar you didn't have before. And guess what? Your fans want to watch games of a superstar more. You're going to have more people showing up at the ballpark. I do think you can have a benefit from things like that because there are too many teams that are tanking. There are too many teams that aren't trying at all. And guess what? Most of these teams, they don't even tank and win a World Series. It's very easy to point to the Houston Astros. They tanked one time, and now they've been good ever since. The Cubs tanked. They won a World Series. They're going back to probably not being very good, although they just signed Marcus Stroman, which makes no sense to me because they're not even trying to win next year, in theory. But my point is, a lot of these teams that tank never get anything on the good end out of it. The Pittsburgh Pirates, what do they get out of tanking? Nothing.
Yeah, no one even goes to watch them play. It's so I don't get it. But yeah, how is that even possible? By the way, to only spend $40 million a year? So they don't have
nothing.
Two guys making $10 million and then another guy make nothing. They're all making $5 million.
Well, look, in theory, because there's no salary cap floor. In theory, if the Pittsburgh Pirates or the Baltimore Orioles wanted to, they could have their entire team be young guys that are making close to the minimum or arbitration type guys. I mean, if you wanted to have an entire team in baseball of guys making the minimum, you could conceivably make that happen. And your payroll would be what? Like $13, $14 million. Probably, probably $15, $17 million. But I mean, that's not even making an attempt to win.
Again,
whatsoever.
I just don't understand as an owner, like why, what are you doing? Why don't you put your money in something else and get out of there? I just don't understand. It's like your little puppet that you treat like crap. You know, it's like your dog that you don't spend any money on. You just leave him out and just let him just sit there. I don't like it. Or your kid.
Do you guys
That's
think,
more realistic.
Do you guys
Go ahead, buddy.
think that the MLB should go the route that the NHL and NBA are going, where they do the lottery picks? How they like put everybody's names like, not in a basket, but you know what I mean, where like they kind of like shuffle up everybody's teams, because it's the same thing with football too, where all you got to do is just be the worst team and you get the first overall pick, so you can willingly just it's easy to just tank. Whereas with hockey and the NBA, you have to actually, you want to be one of the competitive bad teams, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think the difference, where baseball's different there is that most baseball draft picks are so far away from the big leagues. Even at the minimum, usually it's 3 years, right? Now, every once in a while, could you get an amazing college player that could play even sometimes that year if you're a relief pitcher, or the next year? But if you're drafting an 18-year-old high school kid, okay, every once in a while you'll have an Alex Rodriguez. But that guy's probably more like 3 to 4 years away. So I think although it makes sense, if you're going to tank, it does make sense to rack up as many high draft picks as possible over a 3, 4, 5 year span. But I don't think it's like those other sports, because if you get LeBron or if you get Tim Duncan,
it's over. Yeah.
You change your team in 1 year. If you get Crosby, you change your team. If you go back to the whole reason that the Rams were able to trade the RG3 pick was because teams so badly wanted Andrew Luck and Robert Griffin III, because in football, in theory, that quarterback can change the whole trajectory of your organization. Whereas in baseball, I just don't think that happens like that.
Why is that, though, Charlie? That's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm thinking, like, the drafts are different. Like, you get Ovi, dude, like, it might take you 3, 4 years, but you are having people watch you. You're making money. It's automatic gold mine if he stays healthy. It's an automatic gold mine. Or in baseball, can you get that number 1 pick that's like completely, we're going every night to watch him play? Like, does that work? In baseball, you never really think about it.
Well, even look at the number 1 picks. Now, Mike Trout was a first-rounder as a high schooler. Mike Trout, I know he's been banged up a little bit the last couple of years, but Mike Trout has been the best player in baseball. And look, he's fantastic. He's fantastic as a defensive center fielder. He's an unbelievable offensive player, and they never make the playoffs because it's a team, man. It's a 26-man roster, whatever they're going to expand that to. You need 5 to 7 starters. You need 6 relievers. So baseball, you just don't have the same impact as a football quarterback, as a big-time centerman in the NHL that's playing 20 minutes, or a defenseman that's logging 26 minutes of ice time, or LeBron James, who can basically be on the court for 40 minutes. The best baseball player, look, you need 4 or 5 other guys to get there.
And that's unfortunate, because it does kind of make the draft kind of like, we got one guy, but we need him. Like, it's never that one hyped up superstar, right? Like in the NBA and the NFL and the NHL, like you get that big dog. You get Connor McDavid, Crosby's coming out where he's at 13 years old, he's scoring 150 points against 16-year-olds. Like in baseball, like you don't have the monster, you just don't. And that kind of sucks a little bit, Although you could have one, it's just not as loud, I guess.
Well, Charlie makes a good point too. Even if you get a guy first overall pick and he's a pitcher, he's only pitching once every 5th day.
Well, that's why the hype's not there.
Yeah. No, it was a good explanation to my question. I don't disagree. I definitely think that the way that the format is between how football and baseball are kind of similar. Or I'm sorry, football and basketball are kind of similar, and then baseball's kind of different from all that. But yeah,